We're going to kick off day 2 of Innovate South with our first keynote speaker, who you may recognize from last year's Innovate South, Kelly Campbell. So for those of you who may not have heard Kelly last year, she is an agency growth consultant and coach. As a former digital agency owner, she helps creative technology agencies and their leaders transform. Live from New York, it's Kelly Campbell.
Dustin, you were just waiting to say that.
The whole time. I just couldn't wait to get to that line.
The whole time. Well, thank you so much. I am going to talk today about new business, new language, and our new world. And what does any of that mean? I think we're really seeing that we are in a really, really interesting place in the world right now, right? All of us came together today because we have at least one thing in common. And that one thing is really entrepreneurial spirit, right? We are so used to going at 150 miles per hour because we don't know another speed. As entrepreneurs, we're doers, right? We're conquerors. We are the rainmakers in our organizations. We have become maestros of getting shit done, right? And then what happened? We found ourselves all in this global pandemic that forced us to really slam on those brakes, right? And it's not a comfortable place for entrepreneurs who are used to doing, who are used to kind of leaning in and just putting all of their efforts into it, pushing through emotion, all for the sake of getting things done, right? Some people call this the era of COVID-19, but I prefer a different terminology. I prefer the great pause of 2020. I think it's a better representation of what's actually going on right now. So we're at this global inflection point where we actually have an opportunity to embrace this elusive integration, this elusive thing that we thought that we couldn't have, right? People used to talk about life-work balance, but it's not about life-work balance. We have the opportunity to embrace this elusive and pivot, not for pivot's sake, but to actually go back to our core values and reimagine. What I'm talking about here is a more integrated approach to life. It could actually generate exponentially more growth as we enter what I'm calling the emotion economy, right? Whoops. So the question is, to kick this off, how do we convey our value most effectively? There are 2 different ways to think about this, right? You could show curiosity. You could listen to understand and not to reply. You could mirror back when you're talking to prospects, just to understand and ensure clarity. You can offer considerations, not solutions. And you can ask more questions, right? That's one approach. The other approach is what most of us do. And there's a poll here that you can answer while we're talking through this. If you're in a service-based firm and your charge is mostly business development, do you tend to lean into side B, which is stating your experience, listing your capabilities, touting your accolades and awards, showing your client roster, and explaining your approach or philosophy? You know, it's a very, very interesting thing that when you think about what option A is really all about is, yes, it's we, but it's an inclusive, a dialogue, right? That's really the approach that we're talking about. On the B side, the we is actually more about us because it's exclusive. It's really a monologue. So as we forge ahead into this new world that we're co-creating, I really want us to be mindful of the language that we craft. This is a great quote from Emily Sarkozy, co-founder of a branding agency called Root and River. She says, let's resign the old instincts to overinvest, over-index in these more masculine approaches to convince, to direct, to demand, right? Instead, could we imagine a world where we unleash our feminine instincts to be emotional, invitational, and inspiring? So what I'm talking about here is a more balanced approach to business development. What this does is it leads to more predictable revenue, because that's what we all want, right? I want to be really clear that this has nothing to do with gender. So when we talk about these things, being energy in Buddhist psychology, Buddhist terms, being energy versus doing energy, yes, there's a masculine and a feminine, but it has nothing to do with gender. These are the energies or the essence or the qualities of these things. And by the way, the very qualities, these being energies, these being qualities, the more feminine qualities have been perceived as weakness historically, and they've been devalued in our society. The interesting thing is now that we're in this emotion collaboration economy, these are now the hallmarks of good leadership, healthy personal relationships, and sustainable businesses, right? So it's about a balance between the being, the doing, the collaboration, the winning. You can't have one without the other if you want to be successful. So what we're talking here is about receptivity and a generative approach. So if you're in business development and you're charged with bringing more business into your sales-based organization, whatever type of professional services they may be, there are ideal leads for you, right? And so one of the questions here is, how can all of this idea of leaning more into the feminine, being more vulnerable, being more authentic, how can this actually help us in business development? Well, we got to start at the top. When leads come in, whether they're referred to us or they come inbound, whatever the case may be, we have to be able to qualify them. And I really believe that it's all in the questions that we ask and how we ask them. So verbatim, you can say to a potential client, all solutions aside, what impact is this challenge having on your organization? Can you say more about other areas that might be affected if this challenge remains unsolved? What happens? What would success look like to you on the other side? This is a great question, and it's more of a risk tolerance question, right? So if you work with a financial advisor, they may have asked about risk tolerance to gauge where they want to put your investments. How would you describe your organization? Is it conservative? Is it open, sort of a hybrid in the middle? Or is it disruptive? And last, what budget have you allocated? We have to talk about money earlier on in these conversations because we don't want to waste our time or their time. So what budget have you allocated? What ROI is expected? And how might it be measured internally? Now, this is not an exhaustive list, right? You're going to have a lot more questions if you're doing discovery really well. Those questions are going to be very specific to your industry. But by and large, when we're providing services, these are the questions that can help us to understand if this is a great lead for us. And it's very engaging, right? This is about showing curiosity, really wanting to understand what are these problems for these potential clients, and they're ultimately going to help you to sell better. One of my clients actually, he was giving me some feedback, he's a coaching client of mine, and we've been working through this whole methodology together for, I would say, the last 6 months to a year. And he literally said to me, Kelly, the last 2 engagements that we closed at our agency were directly related to or because we replaced listening to reply. We can call that or talk about that in the context of pitching, with listening to understand, which is partnering, right? So you want to understand first, be understood second. If you literally take nothing else away from today's presentation, let it be that. So what does this actually look like in discovery beyond the questions, right? Yes, we have to ask those right questions. But the reality is when you're talking to a client, this first meeting, whether it's a client or investor, I know that there's some startups, as attendees today, this could actually lead to a really long-term relationship with these potential clients or investors, or we could chalk it up to just a valuable learning experience. Now, by the way, that valuable learning experience could also mean that you go through all of this process, you ask the right questions, you find out that they're not ideal, and then you refer them elsewhere, or you tell them why you're not a good fit, whatever the case may be. That's still extremely valuable because now you've saved your team a ton of time, a ton of headache, and you've probably actually kept more money in your pocket than what would have happened if you took that client on. So during discovery, this looks like and feels like asking those questions, probing deeper, reading the room. We're all doing this on Zoom right now. Eventually things will open up a little bit, but whether you're virtual or whether you're in person with these prospective clients, you have to be able to read the room, right? Picking up on different energies, cues. Are people kind of rolling their eyes? What's happening in the room that you need to pick up on? Is there tension between two of the people that you're talking to? This is all information that you're going to want to keep in mind so that you can go back to it later and either ask about it or make sure that you know who your allies are in that prospective client organization. You want to listen for emotion, right? So this is about active listening, intent, deep listening, where we listen not only to the words that are being said, but for the emotion behind them, right? Because challenge is pain point. Pain point means there's something underneath that is emotionally causing this organization or this person to come out and reach out to you for your help. Understand, then be understood. One of my absolute favorite, takeaways. I cannot, really drive that home enough. Let them know that you heard them. So this is the mirroring back. So what I heard you say, Charlie, was that XYZ, right? Let them know. You can say it in their words, and then sometimes you want to repeat it back in your words so that you can say, okay, so I hear that you've said it this way, or you said that your problem statement was this. This is how I understand it, using my language. Does that sound right? So you see how that's much more of a dialogue. You want to resist that monologue we, right? Let them ask about your company. This is by and large, like most service professionals do not get this right. They lead presentations, and we'll talk about this, we'll get into this next. They lead with everything about them, right? Back to that poll at the beginning. Are we leaning into, this is my experience, this is who I work with, this is my approach? Like, wow, you're overwhelming me with so much information about you. The flip side is to let them actually ask about your company. Because if you've done this all right, the natural pendulums will swing back in the direction of them asking questions, right? When you're asking questions of them and they're answering them, pendulum will swing back for them to say, wow, this sounds great. Tell us a little bit more about your company. Are the people here at the table, the people who we're meeting with, are they the same ones that are going to work on our account, or is it going to be someone else? What's their experience? What other clients do you work with? Let them ask the questions. That shows how much more engaged they are, right? You don't need to know the answer. Remember, you are on a discovery call, maybe a first or second interaction. You do not need to give any solutions. Do not give away your strategic thinking. That's a whole nother component of this, but the takeaway for this particular point is do not need to know the answer. It's okay to say, you know what, I'm not sure, to a prospective client's question. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I'm going to meet with my team, or I'm going to do my homework, whatever the case may be. Don't leave a session, any session, discovery, second interaction, proposal review, whatever the case may be. Do not leave any interactions without scheduling your next one. So let's talk about those presentations. This is actually one of my favorite parts because I think that this could be the actual game changer for so many people. And by the way, the reason why this is asterisked is it's not just the presentations. When I say presentations, yes, I'm going to talk about it in the context of like a deck, right? Like some presentation that you would put together for a prospective client. But I also mean this in the way that you can translate it into your websites, into your LinkedIn company page messaging, in anywhere where what you're providing and what you're talking about is actually more focused on your prospect than it is on your organization. Sorry, these are giving me a little trouble. Okay, so this is what I call the 10-slide connection deck. And it looks like this. And I'm going to ask at some point for people to weigh in on how different this approach is from what you're doing now. So we'll talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail because I really want you to get it. So the cover, right? The cover is all about the welcome. Make people feel welcome, right? I was at Innovate South last year. I was in Lafayette. I was in your home. Now you're literally in my home, right? Make people feel welcome. Show your partner identities, your logo, their brand identity next to yours. It's psychologically going to show partnership. You may do this already, and that's great if you do. If you don't do it, really, really simple change to make. Slide 2 is going to be a mirroring. So literally, what words have they used so far? When you're in these discovery sessions, you're going to be writing down, you're going to be taking notes. What language are they using? Reiterate that back to them. The findings are essentially your ability or your ability to show them what else you've learned on your own. This is the area where you're going to show how much you actually care about this organization. You're going to potentially show them things or tell them things that they may not know. And that's where the value, the little dial in their minds of, I'm not really sure about this company, to, oh, this is the irreplaceable firm. Slide 3 is exactly where this starts to happen in their minds. Number 4 is restating the issue. So ensuring clarity of the problem statement is really important because they may have come to you with one problem statement, but through your findings, you may have realized that the actual problem is completely different from what they came to you with, right? I always use the example of someone who comes to a website development agency and says, hey, we need a new website. Why do you need a new website? I don't know, conversions are down. Well, that's not necessarily, a problem statement. The problem statement is that the conversions are down, but the needing of the website is not the problem, right? So clients don't always understand the problem statement versus the need. And we certainly don't want clients to be self-prescribing what those needs are, because that's where we start to lose the value of our strategic thinking. The next slide is a relevant case study. So literally, very simple. How have you solved a similar challenge for someone just like this prospect? That's all you have to show. Little bit of background. This is what you're going to talk through. This slide really shouldn't have much. It could literally just be a screenshot of the homepage of the website, if that's what you've built for your client. It could be some metrics, right? Whatever it is, make sure that you are telling a story, because this is your opportunity to really regale them, to bring them in, to set up what is the background of the organization. How similar is that, or was that case study organization to your prospect? What challenges did they have? How did you collaborate? What did that partnership look like? And what were the results at the end of it? What solutions did you come up with? And what were the results at the end of it? That's probably the area where you're probably going to get some questions from the prospect. And then associated with that, this is slide 6 is the investment sample. So this is a way to mitigate those lovely questions that we all get from prospects about how much is this going to cost, right? Well, if you've just given them this great case study, storytelling, if you saw Rod's storytelling presentation yesterday, you'll appreciate that. Tell them the story and then tell them what it costs to solve that problem, right? So you're not saying to solve your problem, it's going to cost the same thing, but here's a sample, right? Number 7 is the partnership. And this is really important. I can guarantee that most of you are not doing this. What I mean by partnership here is highlight the alignment of why you are invested in them. So, you're not vying for the business. You're not sitting back and saying, oh, I hope they pick me, coming from like some kind of nervous attachment place, right? This is about, okay, we understand your problem statement. We've done this homework. We have a deep experience in solving problems just like this. We are invested in working with you because XYZ. This sometimes could mean going back to your core values. Let's say that you're an organization, you're doing some branding work or some packaging design work. And I'm always going to talk about creative stuff because that's my space. But maybe there's a sustainable foods company that comes to you and you start having conversations with them, leading them down the sales path. And because the environment is so core to your values at your organization, maybe you're a 1% for the planet, maybe you're a B Corp, right? Highlight those things. This would be a great engagement for us because your values align with our values. So we want to succeed with you. Right? Nothing more important than showing that. And again, I don't know why most people don't think about that or don't include that, but it's really important because here you're actually solidifying, you're asking for the business in a way that shows you as peers. And it shows that you're actually going to be very collaborative, right? The team, I mentioned this before, introduce them to who they'll actually be working with if it's not the same team that's partnering with them, connecting with them in this presentation. I was so close to saying pitch. In the Q&A, which is slide 9, you literally just want to have a slide that says takeaways and Q&A. Create space for them, right? Be the convener. And then don't leave that without scheduling your proposal review, because that's going to be the next natural progression in the sales process. The last slide is just gratitude. Right? Literally, I sign every email with love and gratitude or with gratitude. Honor the mutual time investment and the transparency that you've both brought to the table. So the question that we talked about, or that I posed at the beginning of this, is how different is this approach, this connection approach? How different is this from the way that you're actually presenting things now? I would bet it's pretty different. So what I'm talking about here is it requires change, right? There's no sugarcoating here. This requires some change at your organization. So naturally, if I was sitting in your seat, I would say, what benefits am I going to expect if I really am going to go full in on this approach, this more balanced, integrated approach? Well, number one, your firm is going to stand out because until this reaches mass adoption, you can bet that you're probably one of the only ones for a long time that are actually going to be presenting this way. There's going to be more value assigned to your strategic thinking versus your execution, right? For whatever reason, we have, as creatives or as service providers, we have fallen victim, I'll say, to this idea that people pay for the doing and they don't pay for the being, the thinking, right? Well, you have the opportunity to change that, right? So by asking more of those questions, what you're doing is you're inviting them in to open up, to be more vulnerable. Now you're starting to get at the real pain that's happening, and your solutions are going to be more effective because all of that opening obviously just leads to better outcomes, right? So now there's going to be less about the negotiation, right? And we'll talk about that. This is what I was going to say, less friction during your investment and negotiation discussions, right? If you show that you're the irreplaceable partner, whether you're a financial advisor, a startup with a professional, a service-oriented business, a creative agency, whatever it might be, you want to limit and really change the dynamic when it comes to talking about, beating the agency up on price or negotiating in any way. And I can guarantee that this approach will absolutely do that. There's also something that I call a reliability factor, right? So if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Longer term relationships equal revenue predictability, especially if you have them on retainer or you have clients for a very long time. Your employees can feel much safer. They can focus on their work. They've got job security, not because they're worried about the company, not going out of business. I don't mean it like that. I mean, they feel safer to come to the table as their true selves, as their full selves. They can focus on the work because there's less attrition. There's less attrition from a client standpoint, which actually is going to lead into less attrition from an employee standpoint. And we all know how expensive it is to hire employees. Those employees are going to feel more fulfilled. So they're going to stay longer. And there's more consistency and sustainability in your business, which honestly, I mean, that's what we all want, right? So to look at this a little bit of a different way, you have the employees, because we're talking about services here, right? You don't sell products. If you do sell products, this is not that different, but what I'm talking about here is specific to service firms. Your employees feel more valued and more supported. What that leads to is lower turnover, higher engagement on their part, which leads to higher productivity, right? So people are always talking about, how do I get my employees to be more productive? You're asking the wrong question, right? Employees feeling valued and supported will automatically make them want to be more productive. It means less disruption to your client's business and better work that comes out of your organization. That allows trust to accumulate. And that, again, leads to what I said before, the expanded client engagements, higher revenues, better client retention, and referrals. This diagram is what I like to call money follows value, right? Is your organization one that actually believes and operates under this context? Money follows value. Also, we can see that in the advent or the rise of organic and natural foods and products, right? They cost more money, but because of the values associated with those, and because the people who are buying those products value themselves and their health more, they're willing to pay more. Money follows value. That's just one example. So if money follows value, then what are we talking about really when it comes to business development? Well, this is my theory. This is the way I describe business development. I'm sure no one else describes it that way, but that's okay. I'm used to being the oddball. Business development, for me, is just an energetic exchange that requires emotional intelligence in order to forge genuine connection. What I mean by that is the energy between in this dynamic is what you generate as well as what you receive from others. But it's the emotional intelligence that actually allows you to interpret and to respond to those things. We all know that the flow in sales is strongest when we feel, whether we're on the selling end or the buying end, because we buy when we know, like, and trust people. And again, Rodney talked about this from Ogilvy yesterday. Ogilvy knew this in the 1960s. Purchasing decisions are made on emotion, but it's only now that we're talking about that being receptive and generative. It's not just advertising targeting emotions. This is about it being an exchange, right? So we really need that emotional intelligence. So the next question is, how important is adopting this? Well, I would argue that the collaboration economy, the emotion economy, is here. It has already arrived. So you don't actually have a choice here. You got to come on board because this is where the train's heading. If you're curious and you're honest, you're empathetic, you're able to be vulnerable, which is really hard, right? If you're able to thrive in a situation where there's connection, and this is really important, if you can detach from the need to win. I'm not saying you don't want to win, but the need to win, detaching from that anxious feeling of like, I got to win this business, right? If you can sit back and be a little bit more secure, those prospects are going to start asking questions. They're going to lean in because they're seeing that energetically, you don't need this. You don't need them. You want to work with them. It's the same thing in a personal, like romantic relationship, right? You want to be with someone that you want to be with, not that you need to be with. That's codependency. In this case, you create trust and confidence that your firm is the right partner with which to find a solution. And by the way, those solutions, because what we saw before in that diagram, those solutions are going to be more effective, more valuable, right? So wrapping all of this up, we're talking about an inclusive dialogue, right? Ask more questions. If you can't think of something, just say, tell me more about that, right? That's a great little hack. If you don't have an answer or you're not sure, tell me more about that. Get curious. This is all about a balanced approach, right? We're going to better qualify our leads through asking deeper questions, more introspective, open-ended questions. That 10-slide connection deck, that's something that should really change the game, especially if you have historically been pitching and you're now interested in partnering. If you've historically been called a vendor and you would like to be called a partner, this is a great first start. I actually had a prospective client call me from a keynote that I did similarly to this 3 weeks ago. And we got on the phone, had a great conversation. And at the end, she said, I can't get off the phone without telling you this. I took that idea about the 10-slide connection deck and I used it when I went to present to this new prospect. And we actually closed the deal pretty much at the discovery. Basically the proposal was a foregone conclusion. So it works. And yes, I did get hired. Money follows value. And it's that energy and that emotional intelligence, right? So if you are interested in a free download, which really goes much more in depth with all of this, you can get your free connection guide. I used to call it a pitch guide, but I've learned better and I admit that I was wrong. Get your free connection guide. You can download that at klcampbell.com/guide. And that'll be available in the next couple of weeks. So when you go there, you'll just put your name, email, your company name, and I will personally make sure that you get that in your inbox. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly. That was great. So we have a few questions.
Great.
And before we start Q&A, I just want to make sure that everyone sees in the chat is the link to the free connection guide that Kelly was telling you about. So just, copy and paste that into a browser and it'll lead you straight to where you need to go in order to get that guide. So the first question we have is kind of a two-parter, and it kind of bleeds into a lot of comments I've seen actually other speakers make on day one. So we had some speakers talking about, multiple speakers talking about asking why 5 times to really drive down to what it is that they're looking for. But in my experience, especially with talking with clients, we've actually had some who have tried to use that method. Some it's worked really well, and some actually got feedback that it came across as if they were very skeptical of this potential client. And when you're continuously asking questions like, well, why? It's like, okay, do you not believe in my answers? Are they not good enough for you?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that has something to do with emotional intelligence, but from your point of view, what are some ways that they can maybe practice asking questions and understanding that the way that the types of questions, the way they're worded or the way they lead into it, what are some of the ways they can practice that, or kind of how do they adjust for that?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I am so glad whoever has asked that. Thank you. So I am not a subscriber to the 5 whys. I'm just not. I think it's prescriptive. I think it actually goes against what I'm talking about. Yes, it's asking questions, but if we want to have a dialogue, the 5 questions model actually, to me, still creates a bit of a monologue, because the only thing coming out of your mouth are questions, and they're very prescriptive, right? It's also weird, like it's super awkward when you ask something, someone responds to it, they might give a fine answer on the first try, right? But if you ask, well, why? Yeah, then it becomes sort of like an interrogation. And now you've like completely changed the energy and the dynamic. So I don't subscribe to that at all. I think asking the right questions and making those questions predicated on what those answers were. Again, I go back to, we're talking about relationships here, right? So if you were out on a first date, you would not sit across the table from someone and ask a question, and when they answered, you would say, well, why? Well, why? you're not going to get a second date, right? So if you want a second date, you want to eventually put a ring on it with this client. That's not the way to do it. It has to be more genuine. And my issue with the 5 questions, 5 whys, is it's not genuine. That's not normal human authentic dialogue. It actually proves that you're not listening, in my opinion. I would go so far to say that.
So maybe, in other words, it's not necessarily completely wrong to go that route, but you just have to make sure that you're implementing it into, like, you shouldn't take it at face value. You shouldn't just say,
Right.
oh, because they told me to ask why 5 times, that's what I have to do.
Right.
It's important to make sure you're drilling down, but having a way of understanding if that's a really good enough answer the first time, or if you need to drill down further, but to make sure that it's more of a conversation and not just a standard, I was told to ask you why 5 times, so that's what I'm going to do.
You got it. It's got to be less prescriptive, and it's got to allow for things like that, where the answer that they give you the first time, that's great. Move on to a different question, right? If you keep asking why, it's actually going to work against you, because you're not being given the opportunity to show how you think. You're not being given the opportunity to say, oh, okay, so I heard you about that. That makes me think about this other, area of your business. Tell me about that. Is there any correlation? So this gives you an opportunity to really showcase your strategic thinking. And if you just keep asking why, it's like, so yes, in general, the overall concept of asking questions, absolutely, but not the prescriptive 5 whys. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, speaking of questions, we have a few more.
Okay.
So I'm gonna drill down. So next question was, how do you handle pushback if a client tries to hold off on scheduling the follow-up right then and then says that they'll get back to you?
Yeah, I don't do it. It's non-negotiable.
Gotcha.
Basically, if you've taken all of these steps and the client says, yeah, no, we're not going to get our calendars out, we'll get back to you. That basically shows that, not that you've done anything wrong, it shows that there's something else on their side that is holding them back from maybe making the decision. Maybe you had this investment conversation up front because you did your job, and your budget, or the case study, and the investment sample that you provided was literally like 5 times what their allocated budget was, and they're just embarrassed, right? And that's why they're pushing back. So you could say, well, tell me a little bit more about that. What's the resistance there? Because I want to be able to work together, or at least continue the conversation. Tell me a little bit more about what the resistance is. I think that there's a way to disarm people, and they may just say, listen, we just don't have the money to work with you. You'll say, great, that's fine. It's okay that we're not the right fit. Now that you've told me that, I appreciate it. And I can refer you to another partner who actually works with companies with smaller budgets, right? So there's a lot of ways to get around that.
Absolutely. So next question is, what's the best way to handle a client who moves away from a mutually beneficial relationship to one that only benefits them?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is. Like, what's the best way to handle them?
Mm. So I guess, and this was someone who asked that, and if they want to try and reword it in the chat, we can try that. But the way I take it is, we've seen some people, especially starting up a company, who establish partnerships early on, and those partnerships are very beneficial at first, but then as it goes down the road, one entity stops really delivering on their partnership, and then the other one continues to do so because they just kind of moved on to other things, and they don't realize that it's a one-way relationship at that point in time. So it's like, kind of, how do you get out of that, or how do you re-engage them and bring them back to where they're putting in their part?
Understood. This comes down to the good old communication. If you have a conflict, whatever the conflict is, you come to the table, right? You sit at the same table and you say, hey, listen, this is how I'm feeling on my end. I've noticed that this is, you're pulling back, or you're detracting from this partnership that we created together. Can we level set that at the beginning of this, we both decided and entered into this with these understandings? Now those things have changed. So how can we best support each other, so that neither of us are feeling like, we're putting in more than we're getting? If we have to change the agreement, if we have to pull back on scope, whatever this partnership is that we're theoretically talking about, there are lots of creative ways to do that. If you're not talking about it, you can't solve it. So I would say the way to handle that is have a conversation. Do not send an email. Do not send a text message. If you can have the conversation in person, if that's safe for you, great. If not, video. I wouldn't even do this on a phone call. I think it has to be a face-to-face thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic information. We've had some clients, or sorry, speakers yesterday say a lot regarding that, and I think what you added to that really kind of taps it all in. It's all about transparency. It's all about communication and not being afraid to say that, hey, there's an issue here, but what can we do to solve that?
It's vulnerability, right? We're talking about having uncomfortable conversations. There has never been a time in our lives when we have had more uncomfortable conversations in this country. And I'm talking about, the racial strife. I'm having very uncomfortable conversations with lots of people, family, friends, even clients about it. This is the emotion economy. This is exactly what I'm talking about. We have to open up. We have to open up.
So I think this actually leads in, it kind of answers this next question, but you can probably elaborate a little bit more on it. If you make the effort to stop negotiating pricing with prospective clients, how do you approach your legacy clients that you've been servicing at a lower rate?
Yeah, so that's again back to the communication. It's just that conversation again, like, hey, we started out at this point, now we're providing X number of services or X services. Our rates have actually increased. You cannot jump them, the legacy clients, from what they are paying today to what a brand new client walking in the door would pay. You can't do that, but you can at least meet in the middle or have a conversation to understand that, if you're delivering value, that conversation really should not be that hard.
Absolutely. And so we have 2 minutes left, but there was one last question, and I always love to hear people's answers to this. But what books would you recommend for further reading, either on this or just in general?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't do it in 1 minute, but anything by Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, Daring Greatly, Simon Sinek, The Infinite Game. I've been reading a lot of books on conscious leadership lately, and Maury Taherapour has a book that the title of it is escaping me right now, but she's got such an interesting name that if you Google her, it's all about self-worth and value as it relates to negotiations. So I can pop her name into the chat if you want. But yeah, it's all of those are great books. Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, obviously, those are people that everyone would be familiar with. But other than that, I think moving in the direction of conscious leadership and understanding that you can actually create win-win-wins all the way around, I think that's where we need to go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Kelly. And you, as always, just like last year, you've been a phenomenal speaker. You've delivered some fantastic information for everyone attending today.